Hi, I'm Russ Crupnick from MusicWatch. I'm the managing partner. If you're not familiar with MusicWatch, we're the leading consumer insights firm for the music industry in the United States. And I just want to spend the next few minutes taking you through some of the key highlights of what's going on in the world of music streaming. So let's jump to a few PowerPoint slides. Um, I think it's fair to frame this, and we've had a couple of very successful decades in terms of music formats. Certainly, if you take a look at the CD in the 1990s, even digital downloads in the 2000s. But I think that there's an absolute measure of success that we've scored in terms of music streaming in the United States over the last 10 years. So I just want to take you back to 2011, and it might surprise you if we went back 10 years ago, we were still very much a nation or a music nation focused on iPods and digital downloads. In fact, what's really interesting is if you go back to 2011, about half of us were using the device, using an iPod to listen to music, and that's among music buyers, whether they bought CDs or downloads or the very few who had a subscription back then. Only 18%, only about 1 in 5 of us actually were using iPhones back 10 years ago. So, how the world has really changed in just the past decade. And you can see how all of these devices have had a massive impact on streaming. If you go back a decade ago, there were not even 100 million music streamers in the US, 99 million to be exact. Most of us were listening to Pandora or watching music videos on YouTube. Spotify had just launched in the US. There were about 7 million people using Spotify free, and not even a million using the two paid versions of Spotify, whether there was unlimited, and I challenge anybody to remember what unlimited actually was, and only about 100,000 using what we are so familiar with today, which is Spotify Premium. So that just gives you a little bit of context about how far we've come in the past 10 years. And here's some stats to back that up. What we're looking at now is both the number of music streamers as well as the incidence within the internet using populations. So again, if you go back to 2011, there were 99 million music streamers, and that was free streaming services like Pandora, paid streaming services like Rhapsody and the new Spotify Premium, and video services like YouTube. And it was about half of the population was streaming. Take a look through the chart and see how much that has accelerated over the last decade, to the point where we now have almost 9 out of 10 internet users streaming music at least once throughout the year. The exact number is 86%. That translates to over 200 million people who are classified as music streamers just in the US alone. So, in 10 years, the music streaming population has just slightly more than doubled. I recall when we used to do seminars and forums, there was always the discussion of whether is anybody really ever going to pay for music again? That was a big discussion 10, 15 years ago. And the one thing that streaming has certainly changed is the whole paradigm around payment. If you go back, let's just go back 10 years again. Let's go back to 2011. You can see that only 4% of the internet population were paying for a music subscription. A lot of that was Pandora One, which is now called Pandora Plus. What happened as some of the devices really got traction, you had the introduction of smart speakers, you had Amazon come on board, you had Spotify gain momentum, you had Apple gain momentum. Look what happened between 2017 and 2018. The number of music streamers, or the percent who are paying for a subscription, doubled from 15% to almost 30%. And over the past 2 years, it's continued to grow. So to the point where in 2020, we've now got over a third, about 35% to be exact, who are actually personally paying for a music subscription. And by the way, this doesn't even include Amazon Prime. And the reason we don't include that is because most people get Prime for shopping. So these are things like Apple Music and Napster and Spotify Premium, Pandora Premium. and SoundCloud Go. So, as of the end of the year, end of 2020, we estimated that there were about 84 million who were actually paying for a music subscription. It's really fantastic progress given where we were in terms of monetizing music just a decade ago. I do want to hit on a couple of topics in terms of things that I think are very positive for the future of music streaming. Um, Over the past 2 years, we've added 5 million new subs who aged between 35 and 54 years. Why does that matter? Because the original streaming momentum in terms of paying for a subscription was mostly coming from the 25 to 34-year-old segment. Those were the folks who really, really got the idea, the value proposition of a paid subscription, whether it was not having ads, or whether it was all of the flexibility on the devices that they owned, or whether it was just getting the idea of, I have more control of my music if I'm willing to pay for it. And that was something that was really centered around millennials. So, and especially because older consumers are such a big part of the US demographic. It's really terrific that we've started to see streaming go from something or paid streaming go from something that's very youth oriented to something that's now reaching into older demographics. I think this also sets up things like, family plans, because if you're in the 35 to 54 year segment and you have kids or teenagers, we can increase the monetization or increase the ARPU by having older consumers with families hop onto the family plans. I think the other thing, as I mentioned, I started out talking about devices. We're increasingly seeing streaming being used in the car as it gets easier to connect via Bluetooth, as you see things like CarPlay. So as our cars get replaced and as it becomes easier to connect in the car, we're increasingly seeing people react by streaming in the car. Radio is still the dominant way that we listen to music in the car. 3 out of 4 who listen to music in the car use AM/FM radio just for music alone. But we've now reached a tipping point where over half are streaming. And just for context, about a third of us also listen to Sirius. So I think, when we talk a lot about devices, we talk about smart speakers or, Apple TV or smart TVs. The one thing to consider is that for most of us, the largest device that we have and the one that we use most often for music is our car. So this is real progress, and I think it points to continued growth on the paid side. The other thing is, we've certainly gone through a very difficult year in 2020 and the early part of 21. One of the things that we wanted to know is, how are people feeling about their paid subscriptions? Do they plan on keeping them? Or are they going to cut back? And here, what we're seeing is about 56% of people said that they plan on continuing the subscription, 25% are neutral, 18 said that they would probably cut back. Now, I don't really believe that 18% of people are going to churn out. When I look at this chart from as a researcher, what I'm looking at is the difference between people who are very positive in terms of keeping subscriptions, that 56%, versus those who, kind of maybe on the fence, which is only 18%. So I think if you take a look at these, couple of things from an age perspective, from what's happening in the car perspective, from a general feeling about the value proposition of our paid subscriptions, all of these things I think are very, very positive markers for the paid, for continued growth of the paid segment. Just to wrap things up, I just want to point out a couple of things that are kind of impacting streaming. As many of you may know, TikTok doubled its monthly average users last year. We really became TikTok Nation in 2020. What we're starting to see is, if you go back a few years, just go back a year or two, social media was really an important promotional vehicle for artists and labels and for the DSPs. Increasingly, what we're seeing is that social media is becoming a format that's competing with streaming. The little chart here takes a look at how we listen to music It breaks it up by streaming and radio and social media and things that we own, and then other things like watching on TV or Sirius radio. And what you could see highlighted in yellow is about a 15% of our listening time is now going to music on social media. So we're starting to spend more and more time with music on platforms such as TikTok. And that could potentially impact the amount of time that we spend with our streaming services. I do suspect this is going to level off a little bit post-COVID. It's going to be hard to use TikTok in your cubicle, and I hope most of you won't be using TikTok when you're in your car. But I just wanted to point out that increasingly people are turning to social media platforms as a format, a true format for listening to music. The other thing, and we actually started MusicWatch in the early days of piracy and did a lot of work on cannibalization of CDs from peer to peer. The other issue that we really need to tackle as an industry is we're seeing an increasing number of people who are mooching on paid subscriptions. And what I mean by that is, they're getting logons that are shared but shouldn't be shared. For example, there's about 19 million people this year who we estimated are using a logon and know straight out that it's not coming from a family plan. There's probably another 10 million people on top of that who have a logon from somewhere and they have no clue of where they got it. So I think one of the things that we're going to need to do as an industry is kind of address, whether it's through offering family plans, whether it's through education or restrictions. We want to make sure that we can move as many of those moochers from the left side over here to the right side, which are all of the folks who are actually paying for a subscription. So that's kind of a quick summary of what's going on with streaming. And I think, as you can gather, I'm really optimistic about the consumer side of music streaming in the United States. We're seeing good growth. We're seeing good growth on the paid side of things, as well as on the free side. And some of the diagnostics that I showed you from a device standpoint, from a demographic standpoint, and from a value proposition standpoint are all very positive for streaming. And certainly, I'd like to offer all of you the opportunity, if you have more questions or would like to discuss the data, please reach out to me. I can be reached I'm russ@musicwatchinc.com. Here's my phone number. Please feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to talk more about the streaming market with you. And thank you for your time.